Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Asia Society Global Conversation. I'm Tom Nagorski. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Asia Society. We are doing several of these programs, as you may know by now, every week. Programs on the coronavirus outbreak, its public health impact all around Asia and the world, and its global economic impact. Tonight, we do something a little bit different. It goes without saying that the world writ large can use a little soothing at the moment. The world needs calming voices. The world needs voices of wisdom. All of those things have led us tonight to the guest who we bring to this platform, a very special guest today. Thupten Jinpa is one of the world's great authorities and scholars of Tibetan Buddhism. He has taught Buddhist epistemology and psychology and middle way philosophy. He's a creator of a greatly admired program done in conjunction with Stanford University called Compassion Cultivation Training. And he is the principal English language translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Thupten Jinpa is joining us tonight from just outside of Montreal in Canada. It is great to be with you again, even from a distance. And Jinpa, I want to start, as we do with many of our guests, with a simple but sometimes profound question. How are you doing? And how is your family doing in this moment?
Thank you, Tom. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this very important conversation, and thank you for your question and your concern. My family and I are doing really well. My wife and I are together alone, observing our social distance discipline. Also I happen to be one of the lucky ones who can afford to work from home. So my own kind of work hasn't been that much disrupted, unlike many other people in the world. Thank you for asking.
No, thank you. And in a way, we're asking you to work a little bit tonight in helping, as the title of this event suggests. There's so many people in need of some help in the coping part, and not just being informed, as some of our other events do. I thought I'd start when we last had you on our stage at the Asia Society here in New York. The stresses that you were addressing and that you were asked about, much of the conversation had to do, at the time there had been a spate of gun violence here in the United States. And there was a lot of talk about how to deal with that and how to deal with, even for people who weren't in the cities that had been affected by that violence, how to deal with what was really, even by American standards, a very toxic political partisanship in that place. Now, at the moment, it's hard to compare really, but the stresses, first of all, reach well beyond this country and well beyond that one issue. Does the advice and counsel that you give to the people, and there are so many who listen to you for wisdom and counsel, does it change at all when the stresses become so much more profound and so much more global?
Actually, I don't see myself as actually giving counsel or advice. I happen to have a kind of a dual background, educated both in the Western academic tradition as well as originally having been trained in the Tibetan monastic tradition. So I happen to have that really strange dual education background as well as cultural background. So I think it probably, and also because of my service to His Holiness the Dalai Lama for a long, long time, so I suppose in some ways I can serve as his medium to sort of channel his wisdom and his thoughts. And what I try to share is really based upon my own personal experience and also my own experience of what really works and what does not work. And one of the things that the Eastern tradition have really brought to the table in this more globalized world is the deeper appreciation of our own mind's power to heal and also to really kind of show us a way. So that in the West, we tend to rely heavily on experts and we compartmentalize knowledge. And for example, if you have a mental problem, you look for a surgeon or you look for a psychiatrist or you look for a therapist. Whereas what the Eastern tradition is telling us is that actually, to a large extent, you can be the master of your own mind and learn to have some ability to regulate your thoughts and emotions. And also, we know that once the immediate challenges of the need for physical well-being, shelter, and food are met, a large part of our experience of pain and pleasure is defined by the experience of our mind, our thoughts, our emotions, a lot of which has to do with the relationship with our fellow human beings, people in our life, people at workplace. So simply being able to apply our own mind, learn to regulate our emotions, learn to observe it, learn to some techniques of self-calming really makes a big difference in bringing a greater space for well-being. And those are, simple, basic ideas that, many people like myself share, especially as, scientific research and contemplative practice and insights come together, there's an interesting offerings that emerges. And that's the area where I sort of work.
So I'm already remembering the feelings that I had and the reflections I had when you last came to the Asia Society, in that in just a few words, you have a soothing effect. But when you talk now about self-calming and the power of the mind, I must say I feel very Western as you talk about the Eastern approach, because, in even calm times, right? For some of us, the mind has a habit, shall we say, of racing away with our stresses and our anxieties. And I think and it's a tenet, right, of mindfulness. So it's not just Thupten Jinpa saying this, that it's so important, as you've just said, to allow the mind to exert that power and to live in the moment. But of course, right now, for so many people, whether it's a matter of their own health, their friends' health, their economic well-being, the moment is really, really tough right now. So if you can help perhaps us Westerners and others to better understand how that self-calming might start to happen.
I think, we are living the other day I was speaking with someone and I was making the observation that this is truly unprecedented, to use the word not in an exaggerated manner. There are some people who have memory of the Second World War, and there may be, one or two people left from the First World War. The world has gone through a lot of crises, but never in anybody's living memory has anyone seen anything like this level of pandemic, and the pervasive nature of this, threat, and also the feeling of uncertainty. Because first of all, there is no cure at the moment, and the vaccine development is way down the line, and the spread seems to be moving quite fast, and partly because we are so truly interconnected as a world. So a tiny virus that's first emerged in Wuhan within a few weeks traveled worldwide because the world is so interconnected. And the flights take you from one part of the world to the other part of the world within a matter of, a day or two. So we now know that how truly interconnected the world is. So we don't know this threat, which is completely invisible. And also we don't know, because the world has never experienced anything like this, we don't quite know how and when we can afford to ease the restrictions that we have to impose upon ourselves. And that means slowing down the entire economic, activity. And what does that mean? And unfortunately, many companies are also using this opportunity to lay off, probably something that they were planning, but now they have a, excuse. So I think they are sad part of the story as well. And so you are right. What we are experiencing today is not only truly unprecedented, but the pervasive nature of fear and anxiety, particularly the feeling of uncertainty. That is the challenge. I think, when there was war, even World War, the threat and the dangers were pretty clear-cut. The morality of the work was clear-cut. And solutions, whether we achieve it or not, was fairly straightforward. But in this case, we don't know. And we don't know, for example, how long people have to be self-quarantined, how long this lockdown need to be imposed. on a national scale. So all of this is what makes this uncertainty that makes it very difficult for us to kind of bear it. And now, of course, in the contemplative tradition, as well as mindfulness teachings, and the contemplative teachings tell us that as much as possible, we should not suppress what we are experiencing. Because, as human beings, we are naturally averse to difficult experiences. Nobody likes difficult experiences. We crave for pleasure. We are aversive towards difficult experiences. But generally what happens is that when we are too aversive to difficult experience, we tend to deny or suppress them. And so then a lot of energy and effort goes into suppressing and denying it. So since this is a suffering, this is a predicament that we all have to endure anyway, it is more healthy and constructive if we choose the time, not the entire day, because in any case, the fear and anxiety is going to come up in your mind anyway, because it is so evident in the fact that we are confined in our room, in our house. Home is an indication that something isn't right. So we don't have to conjure to imagine what the suffering must look like. The suffering is there. But instead of suppressing it and denying it by rejecting it in the form of frustration or anger, because the denial and rejection manifest in the form of resistance, and that comes up in the form of frustration, anger, and confusion, and so forth. So here, I think a little bit of advice from the teachings of mindfulness and contemplative practice of paying attention, deliberately looking at the fear and anxiety as it were, confronting them, looking at their face, and just observing and breathing. And it can help to breathe in, cool air, and then breathe out and imagine the tensions and stresses being released. That way, you know that you can calm yourself. So I think in this moment, probably the first important skill that we all should learn and use is really some ability to calm ourselves so that we don't get worked up. Because if we get worked up, then we let our mind to be overtaken by fear and anxiety. And when fear and anxiety overtakes our mind, we lose clarity. And when we lose clarity of thinking, then we do all sorts of horrible things. So, and especially if you're living with your family, then your frustration and anger will manifest physically, which can be threatening to people in your life. So I think just being able to learn to calm our mind and breathe, and some simple deep breathing, like in an exaggerated manner, and letting it out from your mouth, even 3 or 4 times, you can see immediately the effect of slowing you down. So I think those things are important, not just for our own well-being, but also for the people who are in our life, especially when we are confined to small space right now, where everybody is next to each other in the family context.
Yeah. So you've given us a lot to chew on there, and I want to follow up on 2 fronts, and they both have to do with the nature that you've just described of our kind of community at the moment. So on the one hand, many of us are crowded in the sense that we are with family and perhaps in close confines, as you said. Let's just go with that for a moment. What is the let's just say that I wanted to do what you've just described, and it requires solitude, right? For many people who live, I happen to live in a nice home in Brooklyn. I have space. I have this room where I can have this conversation with you. There are others who are really in much closer confines. How does that, is it necessary to be alone, really, at least for some time of the day, to do the kind of contemplative thinking, the breathing exercises, etc., that might allow one to face the fear and do so in a way that might not be so debilitating?
I don't think, I'm not talking about long periods of time. I'm talking about 2-3 minutes exercise. So, and there, even in a crowded space, I have cousins living in the Brooklyn area, Queens actually, and they live in very close confinement, sort of small houses, and 2 kids, 3 kids, some of them. Even in a more crowded space like that, you can always find corners, where you choose to be for 5 minutes or 10 minutes on your own. And just making that choice, even to the point of finding a good posture or putting your feet down on the ground and keeping your body posture sort of upright. Because the body posture, and it's kind of almost like a ritual, but creating that ritual sort of, disposes you towards a more sort of spacious mind. So I think, this is where we can learn a lot of things from religion, because when you walk into a chapel, the fact there is a silence, there is a serenity in that space immediately creates a feeling of serenity. And this is the power of that ritual. This is the power of creating the space. So even in a crowded place, you can always find a corner, and you can do this on your bed in the first thing in the morning, get up and just, instead of immediately rushing, sit on your bed and find that 2-3 minutes or 5 minutes. I think if you do that on a disciplined manner, it really helps. And I'm not talking about 30 minutes or an hour-long practice. That's sort of unrealistic for a lot of people. But simply being able to collect your thought, gather your attention, rest your attention on your breathing, and do this deep breathing to relax you, and then just compose your mind so that you say, okay, today I will bring this tone of composed mind to whatever I do in the house today. And that simple intention, you'll be surprised how that a simple act changes the tone, the nature of your relationship, and the pace during the day. So I'm not talking about, long hours of practice.
So we have several questions coming in already on the YouTube platform, and a few of them go to the question of the Anglo-American value of the individual against the, I guess, to your earlier comment, Jinpa, the more Eastern value of community. And maybe I'll just try to wrap them in one here. I mean, you have spoken very eloquently and written eloquently about the power of community in such times. So now we go from a home that might feel crowded with 3 or 4 people in it to the fact that one of the, not solutions, but one of the things that you might say in a normal situation is of such great value. You've said so many times that, reminded us that humans are social creatures, right?
Yes.
And we live in a moment where community in the sense of in-person engagement is just not possible in many corners of the world, including the ones that you and I are speaking from tonight. So how do we reconcile the fact that this is a moment for community engagement, and other than what we're doing right now, we can't really have it?
I think here, the technology has really come to the rescue. We are now recognizing the power of technology to connect. Like this, meeting right now we're having, where we are, you're offering a platform for people to come together and share in this exchange. And also, simple Skype, or my in-laws are in the 80s, and they're based in Montreal. My brother-in-law's in California.
How are they doing? I have to ask, how are they doing with the technology?
Actually, they were, I had actually encouraged them to take up iPad or tablet 5-6 years ago. So by now they are really well seasoned. And now I found out recently that on the FaceTime icon, you can actually have a conference call where you can have multiple family members on the call at the same time. So, the technology has really helped. And in my case, my brother lives in Toronto, He has a large family there. My sister lives in Boston, who actually is, by the way, a nurse practitioner, and she's at the front line of a healthcare professional kind of work. But I've never been so connected. I mean, normally I travel a lot. I'm quite busy, and I tend to be, because I've been a monk for a long time. I don't, sort of interact with my family, my extended family too often. But now in this current situation, we are constantly on Facebook, not Facebook, FaceTime, meeting with each other, occasionally having conference calls. And so I think what this global pandemic has reminded everybody is what matters most in your life. That is that your connection with the people in your life, the loved ones. So, and also your responsibility towards them, your need to assure them, and your need to also to receive assurance from them. And this is one area where the technology has really helped, because voice telephone alone isn't powerful, but when you have a visual communication, it is really powerful. I mean, so I think, so otherwise, historically, a colleague of mine made the observation that historically, when natural disasters occur, people come together. When there are pandemics and epidemics, people separate because everybody is suspicious of, getting infected. And historically, if you look at the literature, like the plagues and so on and so forth, people have reacted badly against others because everybody's worried and suspicious of strangers. But what the technology has offered us is, because of this safety of social distancing, but also through digital, meeting, there's no danger of, kind of communicating diseases. So people are much more open to allowing that need for connection to be really manifested. So we are very lucky to have the power of this digital technology at this time of pandemics.
We have a related question, which goes to something you, and I don't think this is your phrase, but you've spoken about the helper's high, as in the great surge of, I don't know if it's endorphins or dopamine or what it is that we get when we do something good for our fellow human beings. And in a moment like this one again, there is an urge that we feel, whether there are our neighbors down the street or our elderly loved ones, you name it, where we feel that we need to go and we need to help them. And again, it's a little bit like the question about community. Right now is not a moment to go and help the 91-year-old woman down the street, at least not in person. What's the advice you give? Obviously, there are other ways to achieve the helper's high or to do good in this respect. But how do you respond to that question?
I think for us ordinary citizens, I think in this time of crisis, it is important for all of us to truly express and feel and contemplate our gratitude to people who are at the front lines. Because these people, the professionals, healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, nurse assistants, hospital administrators, as well as the paramedics, and also the public transit officials. All of these are really out there. They don't have the luxury to be safe in their own home because they are part of the essential services. And particularly those who are in the front lines of treatment of COVID-19, we as a human being, as a member of human society, truly need to recognize our indebtedness to them. And it's really important to cultivate that sense of gratitude. And when there are moments, when you happen to see them or connect with them, we need to say thank you.
And your sister, you said, is doing this work in Boston. Is that what you said?
Yes, yeah, in the Boston area, yeah. So I think it's really important that and this is why, in various parts of the world, particularly in Europe, they have collectively chosen to have a ritual, like everybody standing out and banging on a pan or something at any given moment. That I saw some of those images from England and Scotland, to the NHS staff, National Health Service staff. It's a citizen's way of saying, we recognize your contribution, we value you, and thank you. And I think that should be our primary positive emotion right now.
Mm-hmm. By the way, you say those words at 4 minutes before 7 o'clock here in Brooklyn, New York. I mentioned to our technical support colleague a moment ago, before we started this conversation, that it may be that there will be a little bit of noise at the top of the hour, but we'll see if there is. But if so, it's for that reason, because at 7 o'clock, it's the chosen hour. Someone else asked me a question, not online here, but before this event today, which I thought was very interesting, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about it. And it has to do with introverts and extroverts. Meaning, her question was that, for extroverts living in this moment where we are confined, where you can't go down the street and hug someone, where you certainly cannot go to a big crowded social gathering, and you can't go to a bar or restaurant, it's a tough time, right? And again, assuming that we're not yet talking about much more profound problems about health or economic well-being. And yet for introverts, if one is well on that side of the spectrum, there may be something comforting about this. Have you thought about that at all? And does that ring true to you?
I don't know. I have two daughters. One of them is more introvert. The other one is more extrovert. The other one is much more social. Sometimes people confuse introverts with less self-confidence, and extroverts with greater self-confidence. But often it's the opposite, actually, because introverts have what the strength they have tends to be a quiet strength. There is a kind of a sense of autonomy where their own self-esteem is not too dependent on, how people see them. So this is one area where introverts probably have more strength. But then extroverts, their strength is the ease with which they can make friends in any social context. So both sides have pros and cons. But in this particular situation, I don't know one will have tougher time versus the other, because we're talking about a prolonged period. If it is a short period, like a few days, probably introvert versus extrovert might have a differences in the way they can actually restrain themselves. But because we are now talking about weeks, if not months, of more restrained social interaction and confined in a much smaller space, I think the personality character, introverts versus extrovert, I don't think will make that much difference. I think where it will make a difference is anyone who is willing to do the difficult thinking, hard thinking, and create a mind of preparedness. I'm here for the long haul. This is not going to be going away within a week. Just have this preparedness, thinking ahead, preparedness. And then when you prepare your mind, then it allows tolerance and patience to come in. Whereas when you expect things to move fast, then time tends to stand still and don't move. So I think that is the important thing. And then, of course, a lot of us have, Netflix as our savior. So especially younger people. And then there are now series and series where you don't have to wait for the next week for the Netflix to, the series to come in. So I think combination of little bit of self-calming breathing exercise with some reflection on the day and broader thinking about the overall situation and
Can I ask you to hold a minute? Can you hear this?
Oh, yes. Wonderful. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. So I was saying that, a combination of learning some simple skills of breathing and quieting your mind so that whenever you are beginning to feel overwhelmed, you can invoke that. So that's one important skill.
Yeah.
Second is kind of a preparedness that I'm here in this for the long haul. So you prepare. And then the third thing is to remember that everybody's in the same boat.
Yeah.
Not just me. Everybody else is suffering. So the kind of sense of connection with common humanity, shared humanity with others, so that because often the problem is felt much more acute when you feel alone. The loneliness dimension makes experience of suffering very, very painful. But if you are able to recognize that the others are in the same boat, that not just yourself, and in some cases, or in many cases, there are others who are much less fortunate than us.
Let me just rewind for a moment. For those of you just joining us, we're talking to Thupten Jinpa, a great scholar of Tibetan Buddhism. And we're, I think, just hearing the last of the banging on the pots and pans and applause here in Brooklyn, New York, where I am in honor of the healthcare workers, which Jinpa said earlier in this conversation is one of the nice communal ways that people can achieve perhaps the helper's high or just a sense of community. First of all, I have to go back to something you said a moment ago. I think this is, at least for me, the first conversation we've ever had about mindfulness and Buddhist tenets that also has had the phrase, Netflix is our savior. So perhaps we'll get Netflix to sponsor this series, but thank you for that. You also said, Jinpa, a moment ago, that it's essential to prepare one's mind for the fact that, it's not going to be better tomorrow, that this is a long-term thing. Again, I suspect some people may think, well, that's easier said than done. What if my mind isn't prepared for that? How do I, what things might I do or might people do to better prepare one's mind for, the fact that we're not going to get gratification or a resolution of this for some time?
I think recognizing that it is a global reality is helpful, so that we don't feel often we struggle with problem because we feel somehow we are unfairly treated, or somehow we are unfortunate. But this is a global phenomenon, so we simply have to switch on the television and we will know it's a truly global phenomenon. And then second thing is that the social distancing is the only thing that works right now. And as individuals, citizens who are not at the forefront of healthcare profession and at the front line of treating the COVID-19, our responsibility is to really observe this discipline with some commitment, because this is the way we can contribute physically and materially to really slow down the spread. And if we are concerned about getting back to normal, this is the way in which we can contribute to making that period shorter. And that's something that I think we really need to know. We can't overemphasize the importance of social distancing at the moment. The second thing is to really know that, we are all smart people. We know that when everybody's worried about either contracting the disease or unwittingly giving it to someone else, there is no way that we're going to be able to go back to the regular, normal economic activity in the near future. Which means, even if there is going to be an easing of the lockdown, it has to be a very gradual way. I don't see the shops being all open at the same time in one go. It will have to be phased out. So just using common sense, I think will help us prepare. And if we create this, give ourselves this space, say, okay, the entire month of April, this is the reality that everybody is going to living through. Once you have this entire month, you're not going to be worried about tomorrow, whether I'm going to be able to go back to work, whether I'm going to be able to do the things that I normally love doing. So this is what I mean by preparedness, not prepared to deal with a big problem, but prepare so that you create a space in your mind for that time so that you don't bring impatience as another problem in your own life and dealing with the problem. And especially the thing is those who have family members living home, keeping an eye on your own mental health is not only just for your own sake, it's for the sake of everybody around you. Because as social creatures, we pick on other people's energy. And if someone is angry and frustrated and unhappy, everybody living in that house is going to feel it. So
like a virus, right?
Yeah, exactly. So each of us has a responsibility to take care of our own mental health and create that more expansive space so that however many weeks we have to go through, we can be more relaxed. Of course, the big economic problems, job losses, whether or not, the stock market, going down, all of this, even if we worry at this point, individuals, we can't do anything about them.
Yeah.
And I told my, father-in-law who takes care of his own investment, I said, once he had done all the adjustment of his stocks, I said, now, one thing I will tell you is it would be a smart thing not to watch the stocks on a daily basis because he cannot do anything anyway. So I think those are smart things that you can do with your mind. Yeah.
So we have a lot of questions now, so let me just tick off a few of them here. Some actually, you and I talked just before we got online with the global audience here about parents and their children. And there are questions about how to, keep the calm and avoid the stress of that. And also, in one case, a question about how to avoid the stress that the children may feel. Now, you have young daughters, I believe.
They're grown up now in the 20s.
They're grown up now. Okay, but what? It's a really interesting question. Both the stresses of the moment and perhaps the stresses of being in close quarters for a long time. What sort of counsel do you give both to the parents and the kids?
I think when the lockdown first began, I have a feeling that quite a lot of parents probably thought this is a good thing. We get so much time to spend with our kids. So I think that honeymoon is over. And now the parents will have to learn, because in the West and in most parts of the world now, during the daytime, we go to work, we send the kids to school, and we pick them up in the evening. And then we spend with them full days, only Saturday and Sunday, when parents are not working, at least in principle. So which means we are available for them 24/7 during that weekend period. And that is the norm that we have, absorbed. That's the norm we have been living. So when children find parents at home, they expect us, if the children are small, they expect parents to be completely available for them. Now in this, coronavirus time, the children are there 24/7 in the same house. There's no school or daycare to drop them to, and parents are not going to work outside the house. So which means the parents and the children really have to learn how to be. It's almost like a new skill they have to learn. And here, I think one thing that is really important is for parents to really give the children not the impression that somehow the parents' work is more important than their children's schoolwork in terms of division of space. For example, like everybody has their bedroom, in most cases in the West, but the public space is the living room and the kitchen. And then, of course, if you take over the living room as parents, then it's a bit unfair And then, for example, also if you have an office at home, which I have, fortunate, and then you have quite a space to work. But if you don't, and then you have to use the public space, then the parents need to be more aware, self-aware, and use headphones if they have to interact with their colleagues so that they're not speaking loud.
Yeah.
And those kind of adjustment is important. And also, I think parents, if the children are a bit older and teenagers and, age 10 and up or 8 and up, I think it would be important for the parents to sit down with their kids and explain and agree on some house rules that will make everybody's life easier. Because otherwise, everybody will be on top of each other. And similarly, on the part of parents, they shouldn't be nagging their kids all the time. They should create a structure. Say, okay, from this hour to this hour, you have your schoolwork. And let's look at your schoolwork plan. And tell me what I can do to help you. And I will only ask you questions at such and such a time. That way, and then weekends, give children freedom, just as you would normally do. And parents yourself, if you're working, you also need to observe discipline so that after the work hours, you should not be working and getting frustrated and being, showing your frustration on your children, taking it out on your children. So those are important. It may seem like a common sense, but actually a lot of people don't pay attention and think about this. And simply, this is where contemplative teachings help. Contemplative teachings, in a simple way, what contemplative teachings are telling us is how can we live our life in a more conscious, self-aware way.
Jinpa, we're getting, my colleague is emailing to say, beyond the questions, many people are just thanking you for your wisdom and your teachings. There is a question, though, which I guess is from a first-time meditator, and there probably are many, I guess, in this moment, right? Stress brings more people to meditation, whether if they're going to Headspace or whatever they're doing. But someone writes, it's very easy to get distracted. What tips can you give people who are trying to meditate for the first time to stick with the discipline of meditation?
I think when you first start, it's not a good idea to have a long session because, normally with novelty, like the resolution you make, we make on the first day of the new year, and then like going to gym on a weekly basis after the first few visits, then it starts getting less and less. So right from the beginning, it's not the few things. One is don't have great expectations, unrealistic expectations. Secondly, start slow and short. So, and one thing that is important is regularity. So I would suggest that you begin by doing 2 or 5 minutes at the beginning. And at the beginning, don't worry too much about distraction. Just simply learn to breathe and keep your attention on the breathing. And breathing is something that we normally do anyway, naturally, without any effort. So this time what you're doing is you're doing it more intentionally, in a more deliberate manner, to calm down, and then simply pay attention to your breathing. And if it helps, you can mentally count your inhalation and exhalation as one round. And at the beginning, just stay with that. Do it for 2 minutes, 3 minutes on a regular basis. But it is helpful to either choose a specific time, say in the morning, first thing in the morning, and also find a specific place in your, just some association. It could be a cushion, or it could be a something that you would put on your chair to remind you, or whatever it is, so that you seek help from the environment to somehow predispose your mind to that quieter space you want to go. I think and if you do that, I think it's 2 to 5 minutes is something that everybody can afford at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And if you notice your mind is distracted all the time, in a way, the fact that you're noticing it is a good sign because you're paying attention. And the mind's capacity to wander is a very natural part of what it is. That's what mind does. So, you should not have this idea that a meditator is always focused and never distracted. That's not human. To be distracted is human.
Right.
So what the meditation does teach us is the ability to calm down ourselves when needed and bring our attention to focus when needed.
And if it doesn't work, it's okay, right?
Yeah. And beating yourself is the worst thing. So I think it's, just trying it out and just don't have any unrealistic expectations of like a high or whatever it is. I think it's that helpful.
I just have a couple more questions, Jinpa. You've been very generous with your time. One is, you are and always have been, as I said at the top of the program, such a soothing voice. And I can't help but think, again, in this moment, with the stresses that we're all living through at the moment, do you get high anxiety yourself? I mean, do you lose sleep at night, or are you immune to such things because of your own practice?
No, I mean, human beings are human beings. I mean, I probably have much less cases of not being able to sleep, but the sleeping, I've always been able to sleep well, and probably it has more to do with my genetics than any meditation practice. I've been like that. I never remember actually having the problem of sleeping, so I can sleep pretty much, anywhere, when I'm traveling. But of course, I do worry. Right now, when the situation was getting bad in Wuhan, I immediately suspected, given the interconnected nature of the world, that it's going to travel everywhere. So and one of the things that I worry about is, I have quite a lot of relatives, as well as most of my colleagues from my monastic lives are members of the monastery. They're living in communities in India. Mm-hmm. How are they going to cope if the coronavirus happened to be in the community? So those things, I do worry, and I worry about what this would mean for many of the poor people. Someone once told me that many of my worries are meta worries. It's about the larger world, but they're still worries, but I find the practice of being able to, bring focus, self-calm myself, do the breathing, and also recognize the limitations of what I can do as an individual, and at the same time doing whatever I can, doing my best. So those are things that really help me calm. And then, of course, I'm very lucky to have a good network of friends and family members, who I know are always there for me, which really helps. And then the fact that I've had the privilege to serve His Holiness closely for such a long time. For me, whenever there are beginnings of an anxiety, I always bring his image to my mind. And
His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So my last question, Jinpa, and then we'll leave it. You spoke a moment ago about global community coming together. We heard the nice tribute at the top of the hour. And I wonder, is there, in your view, as rough as this is, and we haven't really talked even about how rough it is for the people who have lost loved ones or who have lost their livelihood, but I wonder if you think that there is, in a global sense, any kind of silver lining to this, a global community that has taken root in some fashion.
I hope, someone was telling me that maybe this is nature's way of punishing humanity for its, arrogance and exploitation. I'm not so sure if nature actually can punish us in this way, but I did say that I hope that coming out of it, we as a species humanity will learn some important lessons. And one of the things is that this has taught us the deep lesson of humility. This simple virus, tiny virus, invisible to the naked eye, has really brought humans to our knees. And I hope that lesson of humility will stay in our psyche. And this also reminded us that how we're all the same. It doesn't really matter whether you're in the east or west or south or north, whatever color you have. When something like this strikes us, our response are exactly the same. Fear, anxiety, feeling of uncertainty, wanting to protect your loved ones. This is exactly the same. There's just no difference. And when it comes to vulnerability to the disease, we're all the same. I mean, of course, the mortality seems to be, there is a variation, and it shows the inequity in societies. For example, we are now learning how in America that unfortunately the Black community is disproportionately suffering death, from the infection compared to other, sort of ethnicity. So one of the things I hope that we will learn from this is this pandemic has really revealed, sort of the fault lines in our social structures, in our political, institutional, international structures. For example, like for a long time, the world has sort of adopted a new liberal attitude that economic integration across nations is a value-free enterprise. And what the country does in terms of internal politics and governance is none of our business. Clearly, we know when you have a truly interconnected world, what happens in one part of the world has an impact on other parts of the world. So what does that mean going forward with respect to responsibility of transparency when the matters like this come up in future? So I hope we will, and also, when something like this happens, it's the poor that really faces the brunt of the economic fallout. Again, here, what should we learn? What can we do that there is a better protection next time around? And also, I mean, I don't mean it as a criticism, but one thing that we are also recognizing is that the United States anomaly of being the only Western nation, advanced country with no universal health care is showing its, weak spots when dealing with this kind of pandemic. Sure. So all of this are really powerful opportunities for lesson. And I hope, and also this over-reliance on, sort of productions of specific things, everything being, sort of exported and shipped to another part, and just because it is cheaper. Now we are knowing, for example, with respect to the medical equipment, there's a kind of almost scrambling going on, like a high sea piracy, internationally on trying to grab those things for our own nations. That's tragic. So all of this, I hope, will open up, people's eyes. And moving forward, I also feel there ought to be important discussion on the place of humanitarian considerations in structuring our society, leaders in corporate world, and I hope when we come out of this, there will be some sort of soul searching that we will go through. I hope so. I hope it will not be a business as usual. But if that is the case, it will be tragic. I hope that we will learn.
We need to leave it there. I cannot imagine, Jinpa, that business as usual will be the outcome here, but we shall see. Our great thanks to Thupten Jinpa for all the wisdom you've provided in what's been almost an hour now. Our thanks to all of you who've joined on the YouTube platform and others. Reminder to all of you to look to asiasociety.org for coming events. As I said at the top, there are several every week. If you have ideas for events, send them our way, or speakers or issues. And if you care to support the Asia Society as we continue to produce this global online platform, you can do that through Asia Society as well. Again, I'm Tom Nagorski in New York, Thupten Jinpa just outside Montreal. Thanks to all of you. Stay well, stay safe. We're in this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.